I never thought I'd become one of those mothers. The ones who show up uninvited, hearts thumping, knuckles white on the steering wheel, clutching onto a gut feeling they can't explain. But then again, I never thought my daughter would stop sounding like herself. Julia was 34, a grown woman, smart, sharp, thoughtful to a fault. She was the kind of person who would underline your favorite quote in a book before handing it to you. The kind who couldn't sit through a dinner without challenging at least one idea tossed casually across the table. She once left a prestigious law firm because she refused to defend a pharmaceutical company in a class action suit. That was my Julia. And yet, over the past 6 months, that fire had dulled. First, it was her job. She stepped back to focus on family priorities. Then, our weekly calls shrank to short, delayed replies. Eventually, even her texts stopped sounding like her. The phrases were sterile, scripted. We're prioritizing time with the family this season. Our holiday plans are already quite full, perhaps in January. Since when did my daughter need a committee to speak? It wasn't a single moment that drove me to pack an overnight bag and board the ferry out to Hiawatha Island. It was the steady trickle of silence. The last phone call she picked up had ended in under 2 minutes. She told me she'd check in next week, but never did. And when I sent her a message asking how she was doing, I got back a 2-word reply. All good. Julia had never in her life said all good. So I did what I hadn't done in years. I used one of my old connections, a judge I'd worked with on a trafficking case in Portland, to find out if there were any sealed court filings under her married name. There weren't. That gave me one kind of relief, but not the kind that stopped the ache in my chest. The last straw came when her husband, Daniel Prescott, a real estate heir with a Harvard grin and a family compound the size of a university campus, sent me a message from her phone. Julia is fully immersed in the Prescott holiday traditions this year. She'll reach out after the season winds down, assuming our schedule allows. Assuming our schedule allows. As if my daughter was a meeting request waiting for approval. As if I needed permission to see her on Christmas. That was when I packed the car and made the drive up the coast to the ferry terminal. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my assistant. Not my clients. Not even my neighbor who normally feeds my cat. The weather had started to turn by then. A thick layer of wind pushed against the water as the boat cut toward the island. Clouds hung low, pregnant with snow, but I felt no fear. Just urgency. Hiawatha Island wasn't listed on tourist maps. It was privately owned, an enclave of old money and family estates, where the driveways are longer than the roads and the fences are mostly for show. The Prescotts had lived there for over 3 generations. Their property sat at the northern tip, nestled behind wrought iron gates and a small army of surveillance cameras. The guard at the checkpoint wasn't there when I arrived. Unusual. Normally, they don't even let delivery trucks through without a scan. But the gate was open, so I drove in. I hadn't called ahead. The driveway curved upward in a slow spiral, disappearing behind a row of ancient pines. Even in winter, the estate was beautiful, the kind of clean, manicured elegance that looks serene from a distance and suffocating up close. The main house rose at the crest like a monument to control. Every window glowed with warm light, perfectly symmetrical, as if curated for a magazine shoot. And yet, something felt wrong. I slowed the car near the turnaround, about to park, when I saw her. She was sitting on the front steps. Julia. At first, I didn't believe it. Her shoulders were bare. Her dress, black, sleeveless, elegant, shimmered slightly under the porch lights. No coat, no scarf. Nothing but frost crusting the stone beneath her. Her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something in. I slammed the car into park and stumbled out, nearly slipping on the ice as I ran to her. Julia! She didn't move. Her gaze was distant, focused somewhere past the tree line. Then her head turned, slowly. Mom, she said, her voice thin and raw. You came. I dropped my bag and threw my coat around her shoulders. Her skin felt like stone. How long have you been out here? She blinked slowly. Maybe an hour, maybe more. Her lips were tinged blue. I helped her up. She could barely stand. Her heels skated across the iced path, and she leaned heavily on me. Her breath rattled. Why were you outside, sweetheart? She hesitated, looked toward the front door. I said something I shouldn't have. At dinner. What do you mean? Her voice caught. Daniel said I embarrassed his father. I brought up a development deal they're working on. Asked about the evictions. I froze. You asked a question and they threw you outside. He said, I needed time to reflect. On my role. On my behavior. Her eyes welled up, but no tears fell. They froze there, clinging to her lashes. Inside the house, through the large bay windows, I could see the rest of the Prescott family. Laughing. Drinking. Their posture relaxed, untouched by the storm that raged beyond the glass. None of them looked toward the door. None of them noticed she was gone. I steadied my voice. We're going inside. Now, you're going to warm up, and then we're leaving. She flinched. I can't, Mom. If I leave, Daniel will. You don't need his permission, I cut her off. This ends tonight. I didn't wait for an invitation. Julia's hand was ice cold, but she still had her key. I opened the door and walked into the Prescott estate like I owned the place. The music was too loud. The fireplace crackled. 7 heads turned at once. The room froze around us. Conversation died mid-laugh. The pianist hired for the evening didn't miss a note, but the atmosphere turned electric, tight, charged, artificial. Daniel was the first to react. He stood slowly, brushing imaginary lint from his navy blazer as he stepped toward us with a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. Julia, darling, he said, voice warm and empty. I was just about to come check on you. I moved between them before he could touch her. She has early signs of hypothermia, I said coolly. She needs warmth and rest, not whatever version of discipline this was supposed to be. Daniel blinked, then tilted his head slightly. I think you may have misunderstood. I understand perfectly, I said. I saw her. I saw you. Don't play this like it's some household misunderstanding. Behind him, I saw the patriarch, Charles Prescott, rise from his armchair, a tall man with a commanding presence, even in his late 70s. His silver hair was slicked back, his jaw set like carved marble. He didn't approach, just stood and observed, hands resting lightly on a cane he didn't need. Rebecca, he said, this is an unfortunate intrusion. I met his gaze without blinking. Is that what you call leaving your daughter-in-law outside in freezing temperatures? Unfortunate. He exhaled slowly. In this house, we value decorum. Julia knows what is expected of her. My jaw clenched. Daniel reached toward Julia again. Let's discuss this in private. But I was already scanning the room. The other women in the family sat like porcelain, quiet, smiling, draped in expensive fabrics and passive agreement. I wondered how many times they'd watched something like this play out. How many times they'd stayed silent. Julia didn't speak. She looked at Daniel, then her father-in-law, and finally at me. There was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Recognition. Or perhaps realization. I stepped forward, not as a mother, but as a woman who had seen this game played too many times. I know about Eden 9, I said quietly. The words dropped like stones in water. Charles's expression cracked for the briefest moment. Daniel stopped mid-breath. The other Prescotts stilled. Excuse me. Charles said, You heard me. I've known for years. Offshore accounts, front companies, and a very long trail of paper that leads back to you. Julia looked at me, stunned. Charles recovered quickly. You should be careful with accusations, Rebecca. They can be costly. I'm aware, I said. but I've spent my life standing beside women who had everything taken from them, and I didn't come here unarmed. No one stopped us as I guided Julia down the hallway and toward the back door. No one dared. The wind had picked up again by the time we reached my car. I wrapped Julia in an emergency blanket from the trunk and cranked the heat up as high as it would go. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her skin was still too pale. "I should take you to a hospital," I said. "No," she whispered. "Not yet. I just need time. I can't talk to anyone official right now. I can't answer questions." I glanced over. Her eyes were locked on the trees, her body curled inward like a question mark. There was too much silence between us, a silence that wasn't the comfort of family, but the quiet of something broken. I didn't argue. Instead, I called ahead to a small inn I'd worked with during a legal seminar years ago, a quiet place on the mainland with thick quilts and discreet staff. By the time we reached the ferry, the snowfall had turned to heavy sleet. I kept checking her reflection in the passenger window, wondering how long it would take to warm her back into herself. We didn't speak again until we were halfway across the water. "How did you know?" she asked softly. "To come tonight?" I exhaled. "You stopped sounding like you." She turned her face toward me. Her expression was still, but her eyes brimmed. "You used to write with color," I continued. "Now every message sounds like a press release. Third person. Timid. Like you're speaking through someone else's filter." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "That's because I was—" When we reached the inn, the manager took one look at her and gave us the key to a suite without even asking why. The room was warm, full of old wood and soft lamps. Julia disappeared into the bathroom and turned on the shower. I sat on the edge of the bed, the damp blanket still clutched in my hands, listening to the hiss of the water and trying to remember when exactly things had shifted. 20 minutes later, she came out wrapped in a robe 2 sizes too big, her hair damp, her face still pale. But there was a flicker of the woman I remembered, the woman who used to argue Supreme Court opinions at the dinner table, the one who sent me articles at 2 a.m. with subject lines like, "Can you believe this garbage?" "Feel better?" I asked. "Not yet," she said, "but closer." We sat across from each other at the small table by the window. I poured her tea. She wrapped her hands around the mug like it was the only solid thing left. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." "A mother knows," I said, "even when no one else does." She was quiet for a long time. "When did it start?" I asked. She didn't look up, so gradually I barely noticed. First it was small comments about my tone, my clothes. Then it was Daniel saying he worried my work was making me tense, that maybe I needed to slow down. Then came the dinners with his family, the praise for being so agreeable, the reminders that Prescott women carry themselves a certain way. And suddenly I was quiet, too quiet to recognize myself. Her voice cracked. She shook her head. They never raised their voices. That's the thing. It was always polite, controlled, like I was being trained. "You were," I said, "conditioned, controlled." And I let it happen. "No," I said gently. "They made it happen. There's a difference." We stayed at the inn overnight. I barely slept. Julia did, though, deeply, without stirring, curled beneath layers of blankets, like a child who hadn't felt safe in years. At dawn, I ordered breakfast to the room and sat with my laptop at the table, combing through my old case files. If the Prescotts wanted to push back, I'd be ready. Eden 9 wasn't the only skeleton in their closet. I had years of buried documentation. Names, payments, settlements hidden behind shell companies, all collected quietly after Julia got engaged. I hadn't planned to use it, not unless I had to. But that night, watching her shiver on stone steps while her husband drank wine by the fire, that was the line. By the time Julia woke, I had a file open on my screen, a spreadsheet tracing payments from one of the Prescott firms to a lobbying group in the Midwest, correlating with zoning changes near a low-income housing block. It was boring, technical, and entirely damning. She leaned over my shoulder, still sleepy, and asked, "You kept all this?" "I updated it every year," I said. "I didn't know if I'd ever need it, but I knew who they were. I just didn't know who you'd become with them." She looked away, ashamed. "I would have defended them. A year ago, I would have said you were paranoid or jealous or meddling. That's how deep they got in my head." I touched her hand. "You're here now. That's all that matters." She looked back at me. "Then help me stay here. Help me never go back." Later that morning, Julia's phone lit up with missed calls. Daniel, his father, 2 of his brothers, all variations of the same message. "Where are you? Come home." This is a misunderstanding. One voicemail chilled me more than the rest. "Think about what you're doing, Jules. This doesn't have to be messy. You come home now, and no one needs to escalate." Escalate. That was the word that told me we didn't have much time. I made more calls to a judge I trusted, a clinic that could perform a psychological evaluation, and a civil rights attorney named Maya Aldridge, known for dismantling entire boardrooms of men twice her size. Every contact said the same thing: "We're in." Julia sat quietly as I arranged it all. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, but I saw something return to her posture, a straightness in her back, a precision in her questions. "We're not just running," she said. "We're fighting." 2 days later, we stood before a district judge in a quiet Cambridge courtroom. Julia wore a simple sweater and slacks, no makeup, hair tied back. She looked nothing like the curated Prescott wife from holiday newsletters. She looked real. The judge had received our documentation ahead of time, including the results of Julia's psychological evaluation, the digital logs of her being locked outside, and our evidence files on Eden 9 and other Prescott ventures. Julia spoke clearly, calmly. She told the judge about the patterns, the loss of autonomy, the subtle punishments, the way her voice had been whittled down year by year until she no longer recognized her own reflection. She ended with a single sentence: "I am not running away. I am reclaiming my life." The emergency protective order was granted within the hour. That night, we moved into a borrowed apartment. A friend of mine from law school kept a flat in Boston's South End, fully furnished and unused while she traveled. Julia set up a new phone, new email, new everything. She even cut her hair, a quiet symbol of shedding a former skin. Daniel showed up at the courthouse the next day with 3 lawyers and a smile that screamed damage control. He tried to call her by pet names, tried to suggest therapy, retreats, counseling. She didn't say a word. Maya did the talking. "My client is not interested in reconciliation. She's interested in rights, in dignity, in freedom." Daniel's expression hardened. For a moment, I saw the man behind the charm, the man Julia had lived with for 5 years. But she didn't look away. Not anymore. By the end of the week, we'd initiated divorce proceedings, frozen shared accounts, and filed restraining orders. The Prescott PR machine sputtered. Rumors began to circulate in the right corners. Whispered questions about development deals, offshore holdings, and allegations no one wanted to admit they'd ignored. I watched my daughter sit across from Maya and describe her future in complete sentences, not as someone asking permission, but as someone writing her own chapter. And in a moment I'll never forget, she turned to me and said, "You didn't just save me. You reminded me I was worth saving." That night we sat by the window, 2 women bruised but unbroken, watching snow fall over the city. And I thought, not for the first time, that sometimes the fiercest kind of love is the one that doesn't knock. It kicks the door in,